Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And may the merit of the study of Torah be acceptable before God. May it be delightful in His eyes, and may it be delightful in our eyes as well, and your eyes. And may it help bring about a time when the divine sovereignty can be established in this world in a way that will bring people together, that we recognize how we're all from one source, and it's our responsibility to try to be loving and kind. So let's go into the screen share and look at the text. So as you see, we're just at the end of the first day, Yom Echad, day 1. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was a great, great rabbi. If you study Talmud, especially, you will see his name mentioned many, many times. And I believe he was very much involved in the authorship of the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, that is as opposed to the Babylonian Talmud. So the reason it's called the Babylonian Talmud is because it, for the most part, represents discussions in the academies in Babylonia, and the Jerusalem Talmud represents the discussions of the Jewish community in, well, I guess I would have to call it Palestine, because that's what the Romans called it at the time. So it did not have the political, nationalistic significance that it does now. So I just don't want to try to avoid misinforming people. So this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Gadol Yom Kibbutz Galuyot, that the day of the ingathering of the exiles will be as great Kayom Shenivru Bo Shamayim Ba'aretz, on the day that the heavens and the earth were created. Think about that, right? The day of the ingathering of the exiles. Right, so he's speaking at a time, of course, where the Jewish people have already been, many of them have been thrown into exile by the Romans, and thinking ahead to a time that is a fulfillment of many prophecies about the day when God gathers the scattered Jewish people from the four corners of the world and brings them back to the land of Israel. And he says it's as great as the day when the heavens and the earth were created. How does he know this? Here's the proof. Shinemar, as it states, and this is from the prophet Hosea chapter 2, V'nikbetzu b'nei Yisrael, b'nei Yehuda, and the children of Judah will be gathered, etc., the Gomer, V'samu lahem rosh echad, and they shall place for themselves one head, one chief, V'alu min haaretz, and they shall go up from the land. In other words, to return to the land of Israel. Uchtiv, so that's one place. Uchtiv, and another place it says, Vahi erev, vahi boker yom echad. There was evening and there was morning one day. Now, this is from the tractate Psachim in the Babylonian Talmud on page 88, side 1 of the page, and there's the proof, right? The proof, it says, is, it seems, right, on the surface, that because it says Rosh Echad, that it uses the word Echad here, and it uses the word Echad here with Vahi Boker Yom Echad, that's proof. That's proof of the significance of the equivalence, right, of the day of the ingathering of the exiles and the creation of the world. And we'll see what the Torah Temimah has to say about this. Because if you are a little bit shocked by that and a little bit puzzled by that, you're not alone. You're in good company. So, Lamed Gimel. Let's take a look at Lamed Gimel. Here we are. He says it isn't clear at all. Inyan hadimyon bazeh, the whole issue of the comparison that's being made here. The imrak shivui hamilut, and if we're just simply saying that it's based on the equivalence or the comparison of these two words, in other words, the fact that you've got echad in the one verse and echad in another verse, b'vadai kasher, he says for sure it's tough. It's tough to understand. My shayachut zelazeh. What does the one have to do with the other? So, of course, he's a rabbi. So my dad, my father of blessed memory, taught me that the definition of a rabbinic question is that you already have the answer. So let's see what he says. V'nir'eh, and it would appear, Debal ha'ir, that it comes to clarify the ein hakavana, that the intention is, or maybe he's saying it's worth clarifying. The ein hakavana, that the intention is not rak rosh echad, that they have one head, yelahem, vetulo, and no other heads. In other words, when Hosea says they will appoint a head for themselves, it doesn't mean only one head. That's not what it means. So the two and more, nothing. Because that's really not going to happen. That can't happen. It can't happen. Ki kinahug bechel tzava, because as is seen from the practice of armies, right, the soldiers of an army, mitchalkim hatzava lachalakim ulemachanot, that the army is actually divided into different parts, right, and different camps. Right, they're brigades, they're smaller divisions, they're divisions, etc. An army is subdivided. And to every division and camp, Rosh Umanhig, they have a leader and a commander, right? We know about generals, and then we have five-star generals, we have generals on a lesser level, we have majors, we have captains, we have lieutenants, we have corporals, we have sergeants, right? I mean, it has to be divided. And these are all leadership positions within the organization of an army in that example. Ya'an, and why? Because ki manhig echad, because if you just got one commander, lo yaspik, he's not going to be able, lechalkel hanhagat tzva rav, he's not capable of sustaining all the operations of this huge army. One person alone isn't capable of doing it. It's impossible. And in fact, indeed, le'ela hasarim umanhigim, to such, we would say, princes and commanders, yesh rosh echad, okay, that there is one head, right? Shenishma imhem lemashma'ato. Or he has certain heads, I suspect, he says, that are subject to his command. Right? There's a chain of command. V'hu be'erech sar hasarim. And in fact, the value that he has, what we would call him, would be the sar hasarim, the prince of princes, gavoha me'al gavoha, the supreme commander. That's what we'd call him. Vezehu, and this is the point, she'amar, right, that was stated in what we just quoted up above, be'erech sar hasarim, and that is the value or the meaning when we say sar hasarim, right, that he has gavoha me'al gavoha. Sorry, I'm competing. Vezehu she'amar, demash, forgive me, and this is reference to demash katuv. This is exactly what is meant. Not that they only have one head, period, but when it says they shall appoint for themselves one head, lav dafka, it doesn't exactly mean one and only one, dafka echad mamash, only one, ela rosh v'rishon l'sarim rabim. But in fact, there would be this head and the first of all the other princes or officers, etc. Right? We're talking about that. That's what it means by echad. Umevi ra'aya, and the proof he's bringing, the lashon echad, that this term echad, right, one, eino more al echad mamash, it doesn't always imply just only one, okay, rak al echad, okay, so sorry, I'm reading this incorrectly, forgive me. Eino more al echad mamash, rak al echad hameichulad. When it is talking about one, actually, I think I was doing this correctly, that it isn't just talking about a single one, but what it's talking about is echad miyuchad. It's talking about a distinguished one that's distinguished, milashon shebekan yom echad. And why does it say that? Because here, in the counting off of the days, it uses the term echad. It turns the term one, day one. Biuro Yom Rishon, because obviously what it's referring to is the first day. In other words, the question is becoming, why does the Torah choose to use a cardinal number for the first day and not an ordinal number? Why doesn't it say first day? Why does it say day one? Because in all the other days, it says Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. It does use ordinal numbers. Yan ki lo yitachen lomar yom echad, because it doesn't make sense, right, to say day one. Shaharei Yemei HaBriyah Shivahem, because the fact is that the days of creation were 7. Ella, but ha'inyanhu, the real deal is, right, the real point is, shekol shivat yemei habriyah, that all those 7 days of creation, rishonim heim lechol shivat hayamim shebimei olam, they're actually the first. Each one of those 7 days is the first of all of the days of the world, of the universe. Right? I mean, there's creation going on. The point is that there are these 7 stages, and each one of those days is the first day in that particular stage. Umimela, and automatically you can conclude, Heve Yom Harishon Shebebriah. So then you conclude that the first day of creation, Rishon La Rishonim, you'd have to call it that it is the first of all those first days. For Hotziu HaKatov, and Scripture showed its exceptional quality, Belashon Echad, by using the term Echad. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan is actually pointing out in making this comparison to Rosh Echad, which doesn't mean just one, okay, but has this special meaning, which in a sense we already saw in the fact that it said Yom Echad in Genesis, in chapter 1 of Genesis. The kachu biur halashon rosh echad, and this is what we need to understand by the term rosh echad, one head. The al derech tzachot, and in a clear and bright way, ha'inyan omer, that this tzachot inyan, right? I think it's going to say, Omer, he's saying, de yom kibbutz galuyot, that the day of the ingathering of the exiles, yeh be'erech gedulat hayom, okay, that is going to have the value, right, of the greatness of the day shenivru bo shanayim ba'aretz, when the heavens and earth were created. In other words, when the universe itself came into existence. Sorry, Lauren, do you want to comment now, or do you want me to finish off these little?
It's about the use of the word rosh, so you can decide.
Okay, go ahead. That's fine.
Explained echad as opposed to rishon.
Yes.
But it didn't explain the use of rosh, and I think rishon's related to rosh.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But what are they referring to when they use the word rosh?
That is going to be answered in a moment.
Okay.
And then if you have a further question, please feel free to follow up. Right, here we go. Ki kamo oto hayom, because just as on that very day, the Briat Haya Rishon La Rishonim, that first day was the beginning of all those first days, Kach Harosh Shievurar B'Yom Kibbutz Galuyot, so the head who will be chosen on the day of the ingathering of the exiles, Yeh Rishon La Rishonim, he is going to be the head of all heads, the first of all the firsts. And v'yadua, and we can figure this out, the oto harosh, that head that's being referred to in Hosea, ka'e amelech hamashiach, that is actually referring to the anointed king, in other words, the Messiah. Okay, so now we know what that Rosh is in Hosea. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Lauren, but that's the point he's making.
Well,
yes.
they're saying, it sounds like they're saying the Mashiach will be appointed on the very day of the ingathering instead of he's already there and bringing it about.
Well, he'll be identified. People will, I think what Hosea is saying is people will identify him. So if he's there already, which I think is sort of, is suggested by other passages, but the point is at that moment, he will be elected. The Messiah, I will say, will be recognized and accepted, etc. I think the point about it is this is the significance of saying that we crown God King on Rosh Hashanah. Is God King of the universe regardless? Yes, but the acceptance of the divine rule and the divine Creator as being our, sovereign is up to us. Right? That's what we bring to it. And likewise, so on this day, when the Messiah comes, all right, speaking in those kind of terms actually refers to the willingness on the part of humanity to accept a divine authority. And that's what makes it as great as the day of creation, because, it's so interesting that after all these years and after all these centuries and after all these millennia, we're still down to Cain and Abel. Still down to Cain and Abel. Hasn't changed. And so the idea of the coming of the Messiah is saying that on that day, the world is going to be a different world, because people aren't going to need to do some of the terrible things and commit the terrible crimes that they're committing right now, whether on a small level or on an international level. It's so sad. I don't think I shared with you that I reflected on the description of World War I as the war to end all wars. Remember, they described World War I as the war to end all wars, which is perhaps one of the greatest examples of irony that you could pick, because how many years later did World War II take place? But I realized that the difference between World War I and all previous wars was the degree of destruction that took place. And I think the reason, perhaps, and I could be wrong, that it was called the war to end all wars was that people would realize and be so horrified and so shocked by the level of destruction that took place in World War I that they wouldn't want to fight anymore, that it would be a deterrent. And I note that in the Civil War, or the American War in the States, tens of thousands of soldiers died in the battles. But in World War I, the factor was 10 times as much. There were hundreds of thousands of people who died in the various battles that took place in World War I. It was absolutely horrendous. And of course, we don't remember much about it anymore. So who knows? And I invite comments if you'd like to.
Well, I mean, I understand what you're saying, that they're saying people should have been horrified, but it's not human nature. It's human nature to feel angry and hurt when there's been violence and people take sides and it just, I mean, all it does is bring about
Of course.
more reasons to fight and more wars, and that should have been clear even back then.
Right. So Germany.
World War II wasn't necessarily, I don't think, the first war after World War I. It was just the first huge war. First, huge,
Well, certainly it was, in a sense, a repetition, right? Because what happened was Germany was essentially humiliated. The Treaty of Versailles penalized Germany and made them want to pay for the war.
But wasn't there humiliation and reparations that led to World War I? That was not Germany, but France.
I don't recollect that, honestly. At least in the book that I read about World War One, there was a different attitude about warfare back then. And what had happened was, the European countries and England had colonized the African countries and other areas of the world. And because they had such an advantage of armaments, they were totally dominating and making colonialism possible. And somehow they then thought, well, maybe we should try it on one another. But I'm giving a poor representation. It's some years ago that I read the book,
And
that
that's just one stream,
yeah,
but not the only stream of.
I'm not sure. I remember what happened was, of course, it was the murder of the Archduke, wasn't it? That sort of threw everything into.
That's a catalyst, yeah.
That was the catalyst. Yeah.
No, the murder of the Archduke, yeah, of the that was a catalyst, yeah, not.
Because it was actually a very insignificant event, relatively speaking. Relatively speaking, the murder of anyone is a terrible thing.
But it's,
yeah,
but nationalism and all that on the rise, and people digging into separate factions, and and our guy was killed, and
and jealousies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about Cain and Abel and the biblical, brotherly rivals and cousinly rivals and all that. It's all, a lot about jealousy, and especially Joseph, it's very clear, but not only Joseph, but
it's very sad. It's really very, very
it's
sad.
human nature for people to dig into sides and to want to be aggressive if they feel slighted, and and to let their hostilities go unchecked, and war provides a way to do that, to do it so-called legally, and they used to try to contain it by saying, well, you have to have all this method to legally declare war, and they've kind of gotten away from that. It's like, well, if the war is happening, then it's a war that needed to happen. It didn't, but so as far as bringing about peace, this is just human nature run rampant. When human nature is no longer running rampant, it probably would have to be divine intervention.
Well, we could say almost anything in some senses is. So if you'll allow me to make when you say human nature, it is one part of human nature. It has to do with allowing one's emotions to control one's behavior, as opposed to the Buddhist concept of being mindful, which is I think such a well-expressed concept, that when you allow yourself to be mindful, then what you do is you think about the consequences of the behavior. You don't just react on your emotional reaction. And that, to some extent, in other words, you either have a conversation or you listen. Human beings are capable of that as well.
But that's doing what doesn't come naturally. That's rising above nature.
Of course. But as human beings, we have that capability. Yes, you're right. You're right. But
and not everybody does have that capability, unfortunately. And it's easy for the people who don't have that capability to accomplish these, giant and acts of aggression that just lead from one to another, to another, to another, to another. Lots of aggression and destruction and hostility, and those people don't seem to have breaks.
Well, we may have to disagree over this, in that while I understand that there are those people who simply do not have perhaps the mental acuity for this, they generally aren't in positions necessarily of power unless they've been put in those positions by people who really could know better.
Your mental acuity, yes. Emotional acuity, people without emotional acuity are often in power.
Okay. I simply won't argue with you about that, okay? But what I do want to say is I really believe, it's something I've said recently a lot of times. An explanation isn't an excuse, right? And so one can say, well, it's human nature, but that's not an excuse. The fact is that part of human nature is our ability to be reasonable and to think through things and to seek and to think out the consequences of one's behavior and not be enslaved to one's emotions. Okay, I mean, the fact is that there are all the resources here in this world to prevent people from behaving this way. But on a certain level, I do think, and perhaps we are in agreement here, that there has to be a desire, which would be an emotion for decency, but it has to be allied to being mindful. In other words, you have to want to be mindful. There has to be something inside of you.
But the fact that many people don't want to, and those are often the people in power,
Yeah,
because their desire is more about short-term gains for themselves, and that means power, it means money, it means all kinds of things. But they're they do things to take power, they do things to stir up the divide and conquer. You
yes.
know, they're smart, they're not, they're not emotionally healthy, but
Yes,
they tend to, run things. They tend to cause a lot of trouble.
yes,
And it's, as I said, you can have rational, peaceful people who are putting down, an agreeable set of negotiations that both sides can agree on, and it only takes a couple of these people who want to divide and conquer and somehow maintain their power to
yeah.
easily just like, push it one domino down.
Yes, I hear you, and I don't totally disagree with you. I get it. I mean, I think that's perhaps a place for prayer, you know, and for the for knowing the discipline that we try to go through. But I think there is definitely room for prayer, and to some extent, I feel that God is a player in all of this. Uh, right now we're at the end of almost at the end of our lesson. Look, I think there's absolutely a place for adversity in this world, but on the level that it's taking place as far as warfare, et cetera, I mean, we have these statements, that one nation shall not lift up sword against another nation, et cetera, and those sorts of things. So I guess I can pray for it, pray for such a time. I can't have false expectations, and of course, to a great extent, I have to agree with you,
But
you on
but
many levels. But I do think it's possible. I think,
Enid, Enid, Pearl and her daughter Tasha Kaminsky are standing outside Corina every Shabbos singing Lo Yisagoyen and these Jewish prayers of peace, where
yeah,
inside the added prayers to the services, and there are two of them, are
mm,
very one-sided
yes,
and can be seen as inflammatory by the other side.
yeah,
And this is, in the name of holiness and prayer and a response to events. And I think that most synagogues, not all synagogues, the prayers that have been added to the service in response to current events can be seen as one side and possibly inflammatory by the other side, who's, it's digging sides.
mm,
It's not, whereas something like, most of the peaceful scripture and low usage goy and all that, it doesn't do that. It's just talking about peace for humanity, not, just may our side prevail and may our side, you know, be saved and may our side this and may our side that.
yeah, uh,
I like the way they're doing it,
yeah,
Enid and Tasha.
yes. It's obviously, the simple response to that is it's complicated. Are there such a thing as people who are wicked, who are incredibly wicked,
Yeah,
and and they
on both sides.
yeah, I understand, but where's the major influence of these people? There's no doubt, and of course it's now 8 o'clock.
Degradation and frustration in some cases, will for control in other cases. They play with each other very easily.
Yeah. Again, I think what you're bringing out is the complexity of trying to be fair about this, and I appreciate hearing what you have to
But
say.
I don't believe that fairness and peace and goodwill exist in a universal enough way in this life. I think it would have to be divine intervention. I don't think we can.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think I do agree with you there. But then on some levels, I feel that there is divine intervention going on a constant level, and that the area of choice that we have is there. It's limited, but it is there. It is there. Otherwise, there's no responsibility for human behavior. And I do believe that we are accountable. So no, I don't have a lot to argue with you about it. It's a question of trying to clarify and be truthful about these things. And I know you are, doing everything you can.
And we're not going into it now, but there's a lot of room for debate about whether people do have free choice. Lots of room. And we're
Yeah.
not going, it's
Okay.
another
Well,
subject to go
so,
into.
right. True.
But
Okay.
you can't take
Yeah.
it for granted, is all I'm saying.
No, no, not at all. I'm going to stop the share and we'll stop the recording.